The ruling was absurd.
There's no reason why the individual mandate provision can't be struck down and keep all of the good provisions of the Affordable Care Act.
There's two different senators right there on the talk shows over the weekend with different opinions over the Obamacare ruling that came down on Friday. One calling it absurd, and then Susan Collins saying, well, why can't we keep the good parts even if the other part doesn't make sense? I don't know.
Well, the thing's been, it's been so dissected and parted out and sewn back together, and it's just so ridiculous at this point. I was surprised there are even judges even looking at it.
Yeah, I didn't realize, I saw an old clip of when the ruling finally came out from SCOTUS, and old Justice Roberts said, it's a tax. That was 6.5 years ago. So if you're I know. So if you're a 30-year-old, Obamacare's been your insurance your entire life. And, so we're getting pretty far into this is just what the world is. It's, what are you talking about? I mean, if you're maybe a little older, it still seems more recent and we can still fight back. But it has been the thing for quite a while now. And we had Craig Gottwals on, our Obamacare lawyer, just talking about this stuff last week. But, Craig, welcome to the show. There's been a development since you came on. This judge came out and said, no, you can't do that. It's against the law. Where are we now, Craig?
Yeah, well, we're still with Obamacare for at least the foreseeable future. And
so this ruling doesn't shut it down? No,
the Fifth Circuit it'll almost certainly be appealed to the Fifth Circuit, and unless the Supreme Court reaches down and just takes it. But I still think we're a good 6 months minimum, probably a year or more, before we kind of find out where this ruling puts us.
So what did the judge say?
Well, it's kind of an interesting argument, honestly. So in 2000, the issue at hand is the individual mandate so interwoven into the fabric of Obamacare that without the individual mandate, the law cannot stand? And there is a judicial restraint principle here. There's a legal principle at play that says, look, when a court is looking at a law, the court must do absolutely everything possible to allow the law to stand. So if the court goes in and finds one portion of the law to be invalid, the tie goes to the law, in effect. In other words, the court's going to bend over backwards to allow the law to stand. So you have to look and say, is the individual mandate so essential and inseverable that Obamacare would not exist without it? So in the argument for that, in the argument that essentially the judge bought, you have, in 2010, Congress wrote the law and the president signed it with the individual mandate, clearly teasing out that the law cannot stand without a requirement to buy health insurance. And furthermore, in 2012, people supporting the law and the Supreme Court bought that argument, saying, look, this
law has to have this to operate, to fund it. So otherwise, everything that was said about the financial part of it was a lie.
That's right. And astute listeners to the Armstrong and Getty show know that everything about it has been a financial lie since 2009. But so on the flip side of it, the argument that no, the individual mandate is not essential is the facts themselves. Remember, we talked about the fact that getting out of the individual mandate was actually super easy. At one point, they had 32 different exceptions to the individual mandate. And something like
no way to verify whether you're relying or not. So it didn't even matter if you actually did qualify.
You could say things like, I couldn't figure out the website, or I had a family emergency, and then you wouldn't have to buy insurance. So that weighs heavily in the people that think this ruling will be overturned, as they say, well, clearly, this was not necessary because, in point of fact, 99% of Americans could get themselves out of this law with just a simple IQ test, effectively. And then more importantly, there's an argument to say, well, look, in 2017, Congress went in and looked at this and said, look, the individual mandates turned out to be so ineffective. We're going to reduce the fine on it down to zero. And because it's so unimportant. But then when Congress did that, Congress didn't, in fact, overturn the whole law. So that's the argument that this ruling will be overturned, that the individual mandate really isn't essential because guess what? It all kind of was a financial lie, and this is just going to be a big welfare program for the rest of our lives.
Yeah, well, that is clearly the truth. That'll be a bit of a bitter, happy ruling to take. But that's been infinitely clear to most of us for a very long time, and I guess we'll just enshrine it now.
Well, you and I were discussing this over the weekend. So how many people have been insured by Obamacare? That was the point, right? All these poor people out here that out there in the country that didn't have insurance, they're being screwed. We need this system, Obamacare, to take care of them. How many people have been taken care of in all these years, and at what cost?
Yeah, and I think that's so important to keep in mind. Look, it's still sitting right around 20 million people. And
in a country of 340 million, 20 million people have been...
40 million. But also, remember, more importantly, more than half of that are people that simply have just been pushed onto Medicaid because the Medicaid rolls were expanded under Obamacare. And then roughly just under 10 million of those people are people that are actually buying subsidized policies in the Obamacare marketplaces. So
10
really,
million people in the entire country are buying Obamacare on the exchanges. That's amazing.
Right. And of those 10 million, Jack, more than 80% of them get taxpayer dollars to do it. So you're talking about like 2 million or less people that actually pay their own money to buy Obamacare policies.
You know, if America wanted that, that's the sort of thing we vote on. And if you want, government programs for everybody and everything to run through the government, I think it's a nightmare, but we could vote for that. What bothers me, and it reminds me so much of the bull spit train in California or whatever, is you just have to bamboozle the folks long enough to get a vote through, whether it's on election day or in Congress or what have you. And then you can literally do anything. You can change everything. You can keep all the plums and remove all the here's where you gotta pays. You've got to alter, you can alter everything. So it bears no resemblance to what was discussed.
It's that book we've been talking about, The High Cost of Good Intentions. Somebody comes up with a good sounding idea, and then once it's in place, like you were just saying, anything's a fair game, apparently. And we all made a big deal over the fact that Obamacare was 2,400 pages. Somebody printed it out and slapped it down to the desk. Look at what Obamacare is, 2,400 pages, and nobody's read it. It now is, according to Craig, 40,000 pages, if you include the regulations. That's incredible.
Yep. And the best projections are that it will be between like 80 and 120,000 pages when it's all said and done, because they're not done yet writing all those regulations that will be needed, unless they, of course, overturn it. But it's important to remember, one of the sound clips you played, I think, was Susan Collins saying, why don't we just keep the parts we like? Well, at this point, you might as well. I mean, you might as well keep the Medicaid expansion. Boom, that's half of Obamacare there. Simple, easy, and that's actually much cheaper than Obamacare itself, the exchanges. And keep some of these things you like and have... This thing was supposed to cost $1 trillion over 10 years. We're already up to just under $2 trillion over 10 years. So it's already baked into the cake, guys. It's a big welfare program. It's going to cost us a bunch of money. You might as well just get rid of the parts that don't work and keep the parts that work. And I mean, 20 something trillion in debt anyway. What is another $2 trillion? I mean, that's the logic.
Every time I hear a politician say people like the what do you call it? The pre-existing conditions part. Well, yeah, I like it too, but I don't understand how the math works on it. If you make insurance companies take people that are going to cost them $1 million the first year they sign up, how does that work for the insurance company? But nobody cares about the paying for it part.
No, I like eating donuts and losing weight too. I mean, I like that.
Let's keep the part we like, the eating donuts, and just ignore the gaining weight part. It's a pretty good analogy.
Craig Gottwals is online. Craig, the Obamacare lawyer, longtime authority on Obamacare and matters insurance and benefits. So, Craig, I've got this mental image for myself. It was an episode of The Simpsons where Homer was going to build a doghouse, I think, and decided not to read the rules and or the directions rather, and he ends up with this bizarre. It looked like a piece of modern art, twisted hunk of bizarro construction. And that doghouse is what Obamacare is at this point. It has very little resemblance to what it was intended to be. It's a structure nobody would build at this point. And so I find myself wondering, well, why can't the great minds of America get together and just come up with Plan C and just figure out what we want? And listen, it's going to move us down the road of socialism. I hate it, but I just don't think there's the electoral will to do much about it. But the fact that we can't recognize, okay, we've built a dangerous, ugly mess of a doghouse. Got to tear it down and try again. But it just shows you how dysfunctional the government is.
No, your analogy is great. Your visual imagery there, Joe. It's absolutely accurate. This thing is nowhere near what we thought when they wrote it and passed it into law. And I would just add to the fact that it's a governmental mess that it is insurance companies are not free of blame here. These giant insurers are incredibly powerful. Remember, they are a massive chunk of our economy, and they fought tooth and nail to create this thing in such a way that they could remain profitable for the most part. And they have. They've all profited very nicely, doing much better than, say, the S&P 500 since the passage of Obamacare. So what I'm trying to say is you have this unholy, these goals that come in where people want some sort of socialized medicine, but insurance companies still want to remain incredibly profitable. And you've got that nasty alliance that occurs between government and big business, not a free market, but an oligopoly at best, because we've only got about 5 insurers nationwide. And you end up with this unholy nightmare of a mess where it's costing us twice as much as it should, and we're covering probably a third as many people as we should.
Yeah, well, I just wonder, I know it's getting more popular in the polls, Obamacare, but I wonder how many people feel like healthcare is better since Obamacare went in, as opposed to this worse. We were talking about deductibles last week. I know my deductible's insane compared to what it used to be. What was that stat you had on what it is, the average is now versus years ago?
Oh, yeah, the average just 1 decade ago was about $300
for a deductible for a family.
Yeah, and now it's over $1,500 per family is the average.
Just 10 years ago, the average deductible for a family of 4 was $300.
It's the Affordable Care Act, everybody. Affordable.
Jack's point is great because the only people that think healthcare is better now than it was 10 years ago are these 20 million people that didn't have coverage that got it. Mm-hmm. But the rest of the 320 million people in America answer no to that question.
I'll tell you what was a political mistake was for the Republicans to start calling it Obamacare, thinking they would hang it around his neck. I think what has happened in effect is because Obama is pretty popular, is now people, they attach Barack Obama in their mind to this, and he's got like 60% approval. So I think just when you vote, do you like Obamacare? I like Obama. I'll check yes on that, as opposed to your current health care. I think that might be what's happening.
Hey, Craig, can we get back to you were describing the unholy relationship between big government and big business, because when you vote in big government, my friends, on the hilarious promise that it's going to serve you, and it ends up serving the powerful. Let's talk about how that actually works. So you got as Jack described, you have insurance companies being forced to pay for everybody, including the virtually uninsurable. Now, that would wreck them. That would ruin them. How are they getting paid to the extent that they're still super, super profitable?
The insurance companies?
Yeah. How do they get paid?
Boy, they're getting paid higher premiums because they are allowed to increase premiums not based upon your individual health status, but based upon a whole bunch of other metrics that they use as a proxy for that, like your age, your zip code, the plan you buy, et cetera. And so they can inflate these premiums at astronomical levels. And then when people can't pay those premiums, well, the government steps in to make the insurance companies whole. So like we talked about early in this segment, 80% of people that are, quote, buying, unquote, Obamacare exchange plans are doing it with federal tax dollars. So, yeah, we just jack up premiums 6 to 26% every single year, depending upon your state. And if you can't pay it, hey, no worry. Your brother and friends down the street, the taxpayer will pay it for you. So to put it, companies are being made whole left and right.
To put it in terms people can understand, you walk into a restaurant, you order a steak, and the waiter says, yeah, the steak's $350. And Uncle Sam steps up to the table and says, nah, you'll pay the usual $35. I'll get the rest of it. Don't worry. Enjoy your steak. And then Uncle Sam and the waiter go to the back room and they laugh because Uncle Sam's paying off the waiter. And the waiter says, don't worry. Waiters will always vote for you and your party. Don't worry. We got this.
Think college tuition.
Right. And it's all paid by the taxpayer. It's that unholy hogs in a trough, rent-seeking relationship between big government and big business.
Hey, the biggest four publicly traded insurers, guys. The S&P 500 is up 136% since the day Obamacare was signed into law in 2010. Anthem Blue Cross up 367%. Cigna up 450%.
Wow.
Aetna up 540%.
Wow.
United Healthcare up 740%. These companies are tripling at a minimum the S&P 500 since the passage of this law.
And part of the way Obamacare was sold to us is these evil insurance companies have been getting away with murder, and they're not going to anymore.
We'll bring them to heel.
Yeah, right.
That's something.
Right.
Yeah, keep voting for rosy-sounding giant government programs and assuming they're there for you. Keep voting for that.
Craig Gottwals, appreciate your time this morning. We got to run, but that's good stuff right there. Thanks, Craig. Craig knows his numbers back and forth on this, but you know, I have a pre-existing condition. I would not be able to get health insurance back in the day if I lost mine here at work. So I'm sympathetic to that whole thing, but I just don't understand how you make it work. You know, if it were a free market world, which it's not, that's the whole problem here. If you force everybody to take me.
Well, listen.
And so they eliminated the way to pay for it.
Well, what bothers me about the whole thing is, and I'm going to use another metaphor because it helps me understand the world. If you were planning this incredibly expensive vacation to Hawaii and your spouse kept saying, let's not call it a vacation to Hawaii. Let's call it medical research in Colorado. and you thought, well, that's odd, but okay. And you just went along with it for a while. And before you knew it, you're like filling out forms and writing letters to people about your medical research in Colorado and the rest. And you realize, wait, there's some fraud going on. What bothers me is that we've gone so far afield in every single possible way from what we said we were hoping to achieve and how we said we were going to pay for it. So are there legitimate needs in society? Maybe you think government ought to step in. Maybe you shouldn't. Maybe you don't. Are there people who need insurance, can't get it? Are there people with pre-existing conditions who we feel compassion for and say, okay, as taxpayers, we're okay kicking in? There are all sorts of really good, simple, fundamental questions we could be asking and answering. But we're not asking those questions and we're not answering them. We're talking about this, talking unicorn that is Obamacare that doesn't exist. It's a phantom. It's a figment.
Well, it's a failure unless the original goal was to get us all to throw up our hands and say yes to government-run health care, which I think might have been the point.
Right.
And might be is where we're headed. Good stuff there. Our text line is 415-295-KFTC. You're listening to